When outlaws trespass on a quiet single mother's land, they think they've found easy prey, but they don't know who they're dealing with. What happens when the silence breaks and the truth reveals itself in the dead of night? Let us know in the comments section below, and make sure to subscribe to honor the stories of real American heroes. Ma'am, I said, do you have a moment to speak? Emily Raines didn't turn her head right away. She stood with her back to the man, still as a stone, one gloved hand gripping the worn handle of a feed scoop. The hens clucked behind her, their rustling feathers the only response. She had heard him step onto her property before she saw him, heard the unnatural rhythm of his boots crunching gravel, a half-second too deliberate, like someone trying not to appear dangerous, which almost always meant they were. Emily turned slowly, the feed scoop still in her hand. Her eyes, hidden behind a dusty ball cap and years of muscle memory, locked onto the man in front of her. Tall, lean, with two perfect teeth and mirrored sunglasses. He wore the kind of denim that tried too hard to be country, and a vest patched with logos she didn't recognize. A motorcycle rumbled in the background, idling like a threat. "You're trespassing," she said flatly. The man raised both hands in mock surrender, grinning. "Just neighbors introducing ourselves. Friendly visit. Got some exciting plans for this area and figured we'd drop in and say hi." Emily didn't blink. "You're not from around here. We don't do drop-ins." His grin widened. "See, that's exactly why we stopped by. Seems like this here land of yours? Real pretty. Prime location. My boss thinks it's got potential." Emily's grip tightened on the scoop. The man's eyes flicked down at it, then back to her face. He didn't realize what she was, yet. What she used to be. Not yet. "I'm not selling," she said. "If that's what this is." "Oh, we figured you'd say that," he replied, still smiling. "Just thought we'd plant the seed, talk options. There's more of us interested in revitalizing this town. Not just bikes and bonfires. Big plans. Bigger than chickens." Emily stepped forward once. Just once. Enough that the smile faltered. "Leave," she said, voice low. "Now." The man hesitated. He gave a little laugh, scratched the back of his neck. "Didn't mean any trouble, just making the rounds. You take care now, all right?" He backed away, slow. Emily didn't move until she heard the bike's engine whine, wheels spitting gravel as it pulled away down the long dirt road. Not until it was just her again, her and the hens, and the silence. Inside the house, her daughter Ava, 8 years old and freckled like summer, sat at the kitchen table coloring. Her legs swung rhythmically beneath the chair as she hummed a tune from the morning cartoons. Emily watched her through the window for a beat longer before slipping off her gloves and walking inside. "Wash up, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing her daughter's shoulder. "We've got work to do after lunch." "Can we fix the north fence today?" Ava asked, already hopping off the chair. "The goats keep escaping." Emily nodded. "We'll get to it," but her mind was elsewhere. On the man. The patch on his vest. The things he didn't say. That night, after Ava had fallen asleep under the comforting weight of her stuffed rabbit and flannel quilt, Emily sat in the living room with a steaming mug of chamomile. The wind creaked the porch swing outside. She stared at the wall across from her, not really looking at it, but through it. Past it. Back to a memory she rarely let surface. Afghanistan 2009. The abandoned school compound on the outskirts of Lashkar Gah. A 2-day overwatch. 8 confirmed kills through the scope of her M13 Mod 5. Her team moved like shadows, only communicating with eye contact and slight nods. The kind of silence that meant everything. The kind of silence she now lived inside. She had put that version of herself in a box. Buried it when she came home. Locked it away under piles of topsoil and tomatoes and quiet. But today, it scratched the lid. The next morning she visited Sheriff Joe Monroe at the Foxridge County office. A man built like a log cabin, with calloused hands and a voice that always sounded like it had just come from a funeral. "They're called the night vultures," he said, scanning the notes she'd brought in. "Been sniffing around up north, club out of East Spokane. They've been trying to develop, their word not mine, land across state lines. You're not the only one they've approached. Any action being taken?" Emily asked, arms crossed. He looked up, tired. We're watching, but legally, they're being careful. Harassment's hard to pin unless something happens, but if they step over the line, you call me. I mean it. Emily's jaw tensed. They already did. Stepped over. Joe sighed and rubbed his temples. I know who you are, Emily. You think I don't remember? Half this county owes you a debt they'll never be able to repay. But this ain't Kandahar. I need you to let us handle this. By the book. She gave him a long, unreadable look, then stood. You let me know when that book gets to the part where my daughter's safe, and she walked out. By sunset, Emily was back on her land. Boots muddy, hands cracked, heart heavier than usual. In her barn's loft, hidden behind old tool chests and feed sacks, was a wooden crate marked with a serial number. She hadn't opened it in 5 years. She'd made a promise to herself, to Ava, to her late husband, that this chapter of her life was over. But there it was, waiting, and she felt it again, that scratching just under the surface. 2 nights passed without incident, but peace never truly returned to the Rains farm. It lingered only in moments. When Ava laughed while chasing the goats across the field, or when Emily knelt in the dirt planting onions with her fingers deep in the soil. But beneath the surface of every quiet hour was the hum of something electric, something waiting. She started noticing the changes in the way the dogs behaved first. Duke and Rollo, both rescued mutts with a habit of snoozing in the sun, were now restless by sunset. They circled the perimeter at night, barked at shadows they never used to mind, and on the 3rd night, just past 1 in the morning, they woke her with a low, drawn-out growl that rattled in their throats like an old engine turning over. Emily sat up in bed, heart already awake before her eyes fully opened. She reached under the bed, her fingers closing around cold steel. She never thought she'd touch the pistol again, but it wasn't rusted. Cleaned, maintained. She'd kept it out of sight, but never truly out of reach. Out on the porch, the air was cold enough to bite. She wore only a hoodie and jeans, no shoes. The gravel pressed into her feet, grounding her. Her eyes adjusted quickly. Years of night operations meant she barely needed the moon. The dogs stayed close to her legs, stiff and watchful, growling low but not barking. That was when she saw it. Tire tracks, fresh ones, 2 different treads, no more than an hour old, leading from the road to the edge of her property near the south fence line, and there, halfway up the barn wall, something gleamed. She moved fast, checking the perimeter, gun steady in her hand until she stood before the mark. Black paint. Spray can. A crude symbol. A skull inside a vulture's wings. The calling card. So they were testing her. Now, her pulse slowed, not from fear, but from something colder, calmer, the kind of stillness that came before a sniper pulled the trigger. She scraped the mark off the wall with an old paint scraper and a rag soaked in kerosene, not because she feared it, but because Ava would see it in the morning, and she wasn't ready for that conversation. When morning came, Emily was already at the diner in town. People didn't talk much in Fox Ridge unless they had something real to say, and even then it came out slow, like syrup in winter. But today, when she walked through the door with her ball cap low and her boots tracked with red clay, conversation slowed. Tara behind the counter looked up from wiping mugs. "Emily," she said cautiously. "Coffee?" "Black." Tara poured without another word, eyes shifting to the sheriff's table. Joe Munro sat in the corner booth like always, nursing his 3rd cup and reading a newspaper that probably hadn't printed breaking news in a decade. He glanced up as Emily approached. "They were here last night," she said quietly, sliding into the booth without asking. His brow furrowed. "They do anything?" "Tire tracks. Fence line. Spray paint on the barn. Property damage. I already cleaned it." He set the paper down. "Damn it, Emily, you can't do that. You have to document." "Let me take photos. File it officially." "I'm not looking for paperwork. I'm looking for protection." Joe exhaled through his nose and leaned forward. "I told you I'd help, but you've got to give me something to work with." "You want photos?" she asked. "Fine." She took out her phone, tapped, then slid it across the table. He looked, and when he did, his jaw tightened. "Just a little." "Night vultures," he muttered. "Bastards are pushing harder than I thought." She nodded. "I can call in a few deputies to patrol the area more frequently, but I'll be honest, We're stretched thin, and they know it. Emily said nothing, just stared out the window as two pickups passed by on the road, the morning dust curling behind them like fog. Joe studied her. "You've still got contacts, don't you?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. "Not anymore. You sure?" Emily didn't answer. Back at the farm, she finished mending the northern fence with Ava. The girl had her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back with a bandana, fiercely concentrating on hammering a nail into one of the new planks. "You're strong," Emily told her. Ava beamed. "Like you." Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. After lunch, while Ava napped on the couch with their big mutt Duke curled beside her, Emily stepped into the barn's tool room. She knelt behind the stacked hay bales and pulled out a duffel bag she hadn't touched since Ava was a toddler. Inside, tactical gloves, a folded ghillie suit, several magazines of DO 308, a rust-colored map of the valley, and a burner phone with a dead battery. She stood there a long time, holding the phone, turning it over, considering. When she plugged it in, the screen blinked awake with a low battery icon, then a welcome message from 5 years ago. No signal, of course. The mountains were good for hiding, both people and reception, but the device still held numbers, old ones. She scrolled. Mason, Kraus, Hughes, Redbird, Linares. She stopped at the last one, tapped it, almost called, then hit cancel. Instead, she sent a single message. "Need eyes. Trouble on my land. No uniforms. Come quiet." She left the barn, the burner now hidden beneath the false bottom of the chicken feed bin. If anyone searched the house, they'd never find it. That night, Ava wanted to sleep in Emily's bed. "Nightmares?" Emily asked. "No," Ava said. "Just feel weird. Like something's gonna happen." Emily tucked the quilt up to her daughter's chin and kissed her forehead. "You're safe," she whispered. "I promise." But long after Ava was asleep, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above. She heard it around 3:12 a.m. A second engine, low, creeping. This time she didn't get the gun. She just stood by the window, watching. A pickup truck idled just beyond the fence line. No lights, no plates, and two figures standing at the tailgate. One leaned against the hood, lighting a cigarette. The flame lit up his face. Long nose, tattoos down the neck, and a grin like a knife. She didn't recognize him. What he would, because tonight she memorized his face. Tomorrow she'd be ready. 3 days after the truck idled beneath her property line, the mailbox exploded. It wasn't a full-scale blast, just enough to blow the door clean off and send shards of metal into the dirt like buckshot. Emily had been coming down the driveway with Ava in tow, walking toward the gate to check the mail like they did every afternoon after chores. When the thing went off, Emily instinctively shoved Ava behind her and dropped into a low crouch, scanning the tree line without a thought. Her hand was already on her hip before she remembered. She wasn't carrying. Ava screamed once, more out of shock than pain, and Emily spun around. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice lower than usual, almost hushed. She was already checking her daughter's limbs. I don't think so," Ava stammered. "It was just loud." Emily picked her up without another word and ran back to the house. She made 3 calls in rapid succession. First to Sheriff Monroe, second to Doc Mendez to check Ava's hearing, just in case, and third to Mason Linares. She hadn't wanted to involve Mason, not yet, not unless things got worse. But this was worse. While Doc checked Ava's ears in the kitchen with a flashlight, and calming stories about how loud booms were just air shaking itself silly, Emily stepped onto the back porch and hit redial. Mason answered on the first ring. "You all right?" he said. Emily stared out into the wide-open fields. "They blew up my mailbox." Ava was 5 feet from it. There was a pause, then, "Do I need to bring the team?" "Not yet," she said. "But I need you here, tonight. And bring the gear. You know the box I kept? It's out." "I figured it would be. You still got the sensors?" "Yeah, we upgraded since. Wireless grid net. I'll bring enough to light up your whole perimeter like a Christmas tree." "Good. You'll want thermal, too. I'm on my way." She ended the call and sat down on the porch steps, her hands trembling in a way they hadn't, even during the explosion. He'd been in war zones, shot at, blown out of buildings, but none of it touched the kind of cold dread she felt knowing her daughter had been in the blast radius of something meant to intimidate her. or worse. At dusk, Mason pulled in with a dusty Toyota that looked like it had driven through 5 wars and come out stubborn. He stepped out in a jacket patched with more Velcro than fabric, a duffel slung over one shoulder, and the same intense eyes she remembered from the black sand of Helmand Province. "Nice to see you again," he said, with no trace of a smile. Emily nodded and opened the barn. They worked until midnight, moving in total silence except for the sound of metal clinking and fabric rustling. Mason planted the sensors on trees and fence posts. Emily ran the lines. They placed hidden motion detectors in the goat enclosure, under the chicken coop, and one inside the hollowed-out scarecrow by the far corn rows. After the last sensor was armed, Mason stood with his hands on his hips, sweat beading down his brow even in the cool night air. "You sure you don't want to call Kraus?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "Let's see what we catch first." But they both knew the kind of men the night vultures were. Kraus had experience with them, too. Before the club had a name, before they got cocky, they were nothing but rogue ex-military and mercenaries, with side hustles in meth labs and weapons deals. Now they wore matching patches and called themselves a brotherhood. Mason reached into his bag and pulled out a long Pelican case. He opened it slowly, revealing a disassembled rifle. "You kept it?" Emily asked. "Wasn't planning on it, but something told me I might need it again." She lifted the barrel, felt the weight of it in her hand. It had been years since she'd held a sniper weapons system. But the muscle memory rushed back so fast her fingers moved on instinct, locking the pieces together, loading the bolt, aligning the scope. Mason watched her, arms crossed. "Just like riding a bike, only this bike kicks like a mule." The first alert came at 2:17 IEM, a single blip on the southeast perimeter, movement along the edge of the corn rows. They didn't move yet, just watched from the barn loft, eyes glued to the screen Mason had rigged from his portable gear. A second blip followed, then a third. Multiple individuals, spaced apart, not an animal, not one of the goats, too coordinated. Mason looked at her, recon. "They're probing." Emily's jaw clenched, trying to see if the mailbox was just luck. She grabbed the rifle and moved toward the barn window, popping the side hatch and setting up position. Mason followed with binoculars. From the window, the field looked like any other late-night prairie scene. Still, quiet, wind brushing the tops of the crops like lullabies. But through the scope, it was war. She saw the first one step into frame, masked, carrying something that gleamed slightly in the moonlight. Not a gun, too long. Maybe a pipe or a bat. The others were spread out behind him, their outlines barely visible. She didn't pull the trigger. Not yet. She watched. Then they did something strange. They stopped. Each man reached down and dropped something. Not weapons. Something else. She zoomed in. Flags, small ones. Black cloth, painted with the Skullwing logo. Like claims. They were marking her land. Mason muttered, "These sons up." She lowered the rifle. "No," she said. "Let them. I want the town to see it." "What? You're just gonna let them mark your land like cattle?" Emily turned. "No. I'm going to make them think they've won. And then I'm going to take it all back." Mason shook his head, but didn't argue. He knew her. Knew that voice. It wasn't fear. It was something more dangerous. By morning, the flags were still there. And so were the whispers. In town, folks noticed. The high school bus passed by and saw the symbols in the field. A teenager snapped a photo. It hit social media before noon. Emily stood in line at the feed store and listened as 2 old-timers discussed it under their breath. "Looks like the vultures are staking claim. Shame, that woman's got a kid. She used to be something, though. Didn't she? One of them rangers? Green beret? Sniper? That right?" Emily walked past them without saying a word. Outside the store, Sheriff Monroe waited by his cruiser. He didn't bother with a greeting, just held up a printed version of the photo. "This is what you wanted?" he asked. "I wanted proof," Emily replied. "Now we have it. Proof won't stop them." "No, but public outrage might slow them down. Or wake this town up." Joe nodded. "You've got till next week. After that, I've got to make a move one way or another." Emily met his gaze. "By next week, there won't be a move left to make." He didn't know what she meant. Not yet. But Mason did. That night she called Kraus. Then she called Redbird. And finally she called Linares. They all picked up, and they all said the same thing. "We're coming." Emily was tightening the screws on a rusted gate latch when she heard the sound. Tires crunching over gravel in a rhythm too deliberate to be casual. She didn't flinch, just finished the last screw, stood upright, and turned. 3 trucks, all matte black and humming low, rumbled into the clearing near the barn. No logos, no plates, tinted windows. They parked in a wide arc, as if already forming a line of defense. Mason stepped out first. Behind him came Kraus, barrel-chested, his hair shaved close to the scalp, arms tattooed in script that only meant something to men who'd buried brothers. Then Redbird, leaner, quiet, eyes always moving, and finally Linares, the youngest of the bunch, but sharp as a scalpel and twice as precise. Emily crossed her arms. "Took you long enough," she said. Kraus grinned. "You're welcome, ma'am. Hope you got beds," Redbird added, already walking toward the barn. "I got hay bales," Emily replied. He smirked. "Perfect." They set up quickly, no questions, no wasted motion. Old habits. They worked like a unit that had never disbanded, because in some ways they never had. Ghosts of the same wars, now walking civilian soil, summoned again not by orders, but by something older. Loyalty. By nightfall, the barn had been converted. The loft became a watch post with overlapping fields of vision. Camo netting hung in folds around the perimeter, partially shielding the windows. Inside, the long-forgotten feed room became a comm station, complete with laptops, radios, and a rigged surveillance grid patched into the sensors Mason had installed earlier in the week. Ava asked if they were Mom's old friends. Emily just said, "They're people who help." And Ava, wise beyond her years, nodded and gave Redbird one of her juice boxes. That night they took shifts. Emily and Kraus first, watching the road from opposite ends of the property. "You ever think we'd be back in something like this?" Kraus asked, his voice low, more gravel than sound. Emily didn't answer right away, just kept scanning the field. "I think we always knew we'd carry it," she finally said. "Even if the war ended." Kraus nodded slowly. "Feels like old times. Only now, the stakes are different." Emily's eyes narrowed as a coyote slinked along the far fence line, harmless, but reminding her how shadows moved. "No," she said. "The stakes are exactly the same. It's always about who survives." Kraus went quiet after that. At 2:44 a.m., motion sensors pinged, but not on the property. In town. Mason sat up from the floor where he'd been sleeping beside the old stove and stared at the screen. One of their drones, launched earlier and forgotten in the haze of setup, had been orbiting above Main Street. Now, it captured 5 men in biker cuts slipping into the rear alley behind Jennings' General Store. Redbird leaned in. "They're not just focused on you anymore." Mason zoomed in. The patches confirmed it. Night vultures. One of them spray-painted the same skull wing logo on the back wall of the store, while another placed a dark object near the propane tank out back. "C4?" Linares asked from the side. Could be decoy. Either way." Mason stood up. "They're pushing wider, testing community response." Emily arrived at the screen just as the drone picked up the flash of a lighter. Kraus muttered, "That's no damn decoy." The explosion was small but violent. Fire blossomed up the side of the building. Mason turned the drone's lens as townsfolk spilled out into the street, some in robes, others with cell phones raised. No one was hurt. Yet. But the message had been sent, and it hadn't come to Emily this time. It had gone to everyone. By morning, Fox Ridge had changed. The mayor issued a statement calling for calm. The sheriff made promises about safety. Local shopkeepers took to the community Facebook page, uploading footage and writing captions like, "We won't be bullied and stand with Fox Ridge." But fear lingered. Emily stood at the diner counter with Mason and Redbird behind her, all in plain clothes, trying not to be too obvious. Joe Monroe approached with a face that looked carved from stone. "They're escalating," he said. That fire last night could have taken out half that block. They wanted attention, Emily replied. They got it. What's your move? Joe asked. She turned slowly and nodded toward the window. Across the street, one of the night vultures stood outside the gas station, arms folded, smirking at them. Young, maybe mid-20s, lean, new recruit, just standing there. Unapologetic, Emily met his gaze. He didn't look away. I want them to know, she said, that just because they're loud doesn't mean they're in control. Joe frowned. What does that mean exactly? But she was already walking out. She crossed the street calmly, Mason and Redberg following at a respectful distance. When she stopped a foot from the biker, she didn't speak, just looked at him. He blinked first, shifted his stance. What's your name? She asked. The biker hesitated. Nico. You from Spokane? Yeah. You circed? He laughed, confused. No. She nodded once. Then, quiet enough only he could hear, she said, Go back, while you still can. He tilted his head. Or what? Emily stepped close, too close, and lowered her voice to a whisper. Or you'll learn what war actually feels like. And you won't like the ending. The smile dropped from his face. He took a step back, then another, and then he ran. Later that night, Redbird found her alone in the field, brushing down one of the horses under the moonlight. You shook him, he said. He's a kid. They always send the kids first. Redbird knelt down and checked the hoof of the horse quietly. After a pause, he said, You thinking of going on offense? I'm thinking of sending a message. To the town? Or the vultures? Both. That next morning, they made a move. Mason flew another drone. Low, quiet, through the tree lines north of Fox Ridge, tracking the signal Redbird had sniffed out using intercepted chatter. They found the camp. 12 bikes, 6 tents, 2 modified trucks, all parked on a private hunting ground rented out to contractors from out of state. Emily stared at the screen. Kraus stood beside her, arms crossed. This is it, Mason said. This is where they operate from. Redbird loaded the coordinates into a second monitor. Linares began rigging a mock-up for a non-lethal strike. A sonic burst, bright light disorientation, and automated speaker projection. We hit them hard, scare them deep, and make them think they're being watched from every angle, Redbird said. They'll scatter or dig in. Either way, we move first. Emily didn't say a word, just stared, until Kraus finally said, You sure about this? And she nodded. Tell the town, she said. Tonight, we push back. The sky over Fox Ridge bled into deep crimson as the sun dipped low behind the jagged ridgeline, casting the valley in long, creeping shadows. In the barn, the tension felt thicker than the dust in the rafters. The scent of oil, leather, and cold metal lingered like memory. Emily stood at the center of it all, hands wrapped on the live drone feed from Mason's rig. The camp was still there, still crawling with movement, still lined with arrogant laughter and flickering fires like they were invincible. But they wouldn't be by morning. 36 confirmed, Mason said, eyes locked on the screen. 8 more arrived late last night, got California plates. And I don't think they're bikers. Private contractors, maybe. Merce? Linares asked from the far end, adjusting his rig. Could be, Mason muttered. Could be someone's trying to turn this into something bigger. They're hiring out now, Redberg added. Means they're scared. Emily's voice cut clean through the noise. Or they're gearing up for a final push. Everyone went quiet. Ava was already at her friend's house, safely tucked away on the edge of town with Sheriff Monroe's wife under protection. Emily hadn't wanted to let her go, not really, but there were some nights where a mother had to choose the kind of protection she could offer, and tonight, love came, dressed in letting go. Redbird slung a bag over his shoulder and approached the table. Everything's set, he said. Sound arrays go live at 200. Drones will circle and drop their payloads at 215. No casualties, just disorientation. Bright lights, thunderbursts, speaker blasts. Full psychological warfare. We'll hit 'em like a ghost army, Linares added. Make 'em think there's 100 of us. There might as well be, Emily said, because they won't see it coming. Kraus handed her a headset and a tablet rigged with a custom interface. You'll run field ops from here. Mason and I will approach the ridge on foot. Redbird takes south. Linares covers the tech. What about town? Emily asked. Mason looked up. We've got a pair of trusted deputies. Joe's keeping people out of the woods. Whole valley thinks it's a wildfire drill. Nobody's coming near unless they want trouble. She nodded and slipped the headset on. They moved out at 1:35 hours. The men vanished into the dark like smoke. Emily remained in the barn, now converted into a tactical hub. She sat in the center with her back straight, eyes on the screens, heart steady. Every breath, every movement was part of a ritual older than anyone there. It was muscle, it was mind, and it was history. At 200, the ridgeline lit up. Faint at first, just a shimmer of movement from above the camp. The night vultures didn't notice. They were still bragging by firelight, still passing bottles and loading gear. But then came the sound. A low-frequency pulse that rattled through the valley like thunder trapped in bone. It vibrated under the ground, enough to send a man to his knees if he didn't know it was coming. One of the bikers stood up suddenly, yelling something toward the trees. Others followed, turning in every direction. Then the lights came. Drones descended silently, hovering at the tree line, each equipped with strobes and high-beam floods. They burst on one by one, cycling patterns and rhythmic flashes that fried night vision and turned the campsite into a chaotic kaleidoscope of white. And then the voices. Pre-recorded commands, broadcast over hidden speakers buried in the woods. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded. Surrender now. They didn't say who they were. They didn't need to. Some of the vultures panicked immediately. A few fired blindly into the dark, the bullets pinging off reinforced barriers Linares had planted earlier. Others ran for their bikes, only to find the tires had been slashed in advance, silently and without notice. Mason moved through the upper trail like a wraith, his rifle raised but never fired. He wasn't there to kill, he was there to watch, to record, to prove. He tapped his mic. We've got movement. They're breaking. South side is open, Redbird chimed in. Got 3 making a run. Let 'em. Emily watched it all unfold on the feed. Her finger hovered above the command to release the final phase. You ready? Linares asked. She nodded, voice steady. Phase 3. Go. The final drone dipped low, releasing a payload of non-lethal CS gas, just enough to trigger confusion and sting the eyes. At the same time, a recorded broadcast from the Department of Justice began to play on a loop. This property is under federal surveillance. All activities are being recorded. Lay down your arms. Emily had doctored the audio herself, cut and stitched from public statements and old field recordings. It didn't have to be real, it just had to sound real. The effect was immediate. One of the mercs, taller, geared in black with a tack vest and polished boots, dropped his rifle and shouted for a ceasefire. Another raised his hands, calling out, "We didn't sign up for this." Within 10 minutes, nearly half the camp had surrendered. The rest, they scattered like dry leaves in wind. At 300, Sheriff Monroe arrived with backup. By then, Emily had stepped out of the barn and stood by the main road, her rifle slung over her back like a burden she finally decided to carry again. Joe stepped out of his cruiser, looking at the scene unfolding as deputies secured the camp perimeter, zip-tying the last of the holdouts. "You did it," he said. "No," Emily replied. "They did it to themselves. I just reminded them where they were." He looked at her, dust on her face, hair tied back, eyes fierce, and saw someone he hadn't seen since years before, the woman who came home but never really unpacked. "Town's talking," he said. "They're calling this the night the ghosts came back." Emily let out the softest chuckle. Maybe they did. By sunrise, Fox Ridge was alive with stories. People spoke of sounds in the trees, lights from nowhere, and voices that came from the earth itself. No one could quite explain it. Some said it was military, others claimed it was something stranger, but every single person in town agreed on one thing. The Raines farm was no longer to be messed with. And Emily Raines? She was no longer just a single mother. She was a warning. The morning after the raid felt different. It wasn't just the clear skies or the way the wind moved softly through the fields. It was in the silence. A good silence. The kind you get when something heavy has finally been lifted. Emily stood by the edge of her porch, a mug of coffee warming her hands, her gaze sweeping across the property that had almost been stolen from her. The spray-painted skull-wing symbols were gone. Scrubbed. Burned. In their place was something better. Calm. Presence. Home. Ava came bounding out the front door barefoot, a granola bar in one hand and her hair a wild mess of cowlicks. "Can we let the goats out now?" Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "Go ahead. Just don't let them into the garden this time." Ava made a face, and the screen door banged behind her as she ran toward the pasture. Duke barked once and followed close behind. Inside the barn, the team packed up. Redbird had already coiled the last of the sensor wires, whistling some old Apache lullaby under his breath. Mason leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Linares fold up the comms gear with surgical precision. Krause adjusted the straps of his duffel bag and gave Emily a look she recognized. "We'll stay if you need us," he said. "But you don't." Emily glanced around the barn one last time, eyes lingering on the ridge where they'd watched the whole storm unfold. "No," she said softly. "You did what I asked. And the rest, I've got now." Linares clapped his hands together. "Still, we're leaving a backup grid in the northern tree line. If anything pings, you'll get a signal straight to your phone. And a few townsfolk are stepping up too," Mason added. "Sheriffs deputizing some of the veterans, quietly, no uniforms, just people watching out for each other." Emily looked at him. "Fox Ridge finally woke up." "Sometimes it just takes one match to remind people they can make fire." Redbird stepped forward and handed her something wrapped in a leather pouch. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I'd been holding on to. Found it on our last op. Figured I'd give it to you when the time was right." She unwrapped it. A small carved wooden figure, weathered but clearly shaped like a woman holding a child. Its details rough but unmistakable. Emily swallowed. "You carved this?" Redbird nodded once, with what was left of a broken rifle stock. She didn't speak, just gave him a long look, her eyes a little wetter than usual. Then she wrapped the carving again and slid it into her back pocket like it had always belonged there. By noon, the team was gone. They didn't say goodbye. They never did. Just a nod here, a handshake there, the kind of exits you make when you know it's not the last time. Emily stood at the edge of the dirt road, watching the dust trail their trucks kicked up fade into the distance, and then she walked back to the house. The next few days brought cleanup, but it wasn't the kind that left her bitter. The town pitched in, not officially, no parades or headlines, but in the way small towns do when something real finally stirs them. A pair of old mechanics helped reinforce her barn door. The high school shop class showed up unannounced to repaint the front fence. Even Tara from the diner dropped off homemade pies and said nothing more than, "You looked like you needed it." The flags had stopped. The trucks, the bikes, the shadowy figures that once watched from a distance, they were gone. Whether they ran or regrouped somewhere else, didn't matter. They weren't here, and they wouldn't come back. Not after what happened. Sheriff Monroe visited on a Wednesday, not in uniform, but in jeans and a flannel shirt, a box of old case files under one arm. "Thought you might want these," he said. "Old intel, just in case." She took the box, but didn't invite him in. Joe didn't mind. He just looked around at the humming farm, the sound of Ava laughing in the distance, the chickens clucking like nothing had ever gone wrong. "You ever think of running for council?" he asked suddenly. Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" "Town council. There's an open seat. After everything, people listen to you now. I'm not interested in politics. Didn't say politics, I said leadership. She considered that, then shook her head. Not yet. He nodded. When you're ready, they'll be ready too. That night, as the sun went down in streaks of gold and fire, Emily walked the full length of the property alone. From the eastern edge, where the stream trickled quietly through the brush, to the northern line, where the old scarecrow still stood guard. Every step she took reminded her that this land had history, hers, her daughter's, and the lives of every person who had ever set foot here with good intentions. She stopped at the spot where the mailbox used to stand. Now, in its place, stood a new one. Painted by Ava, it bore a hand-drawn green beret on one side and a cluster of wildflowers on the other. Emily smiled. The next morning she brewed coffee just before dawn, the way she always had, only this time she added an extra scoop. Out of habit. Out of hope. Because sometimes people came back, and when they did, they'd want it hot. She sat on the porch, boots up on the railing, watching as the sun began to rise over the ridge. Ava came out and sat beside her, hair still tangled from sleep. "Are the bad guys really gone?" she asked, her voice small but sure. Emily nodded. "They are." "You made them go away?" "No," Emily said, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We did. All of us. Together." Ava leaned her head against her mother's arm and let out a long breath. "I like our farm." "I do too." They sat in silence a little longer, sipping coffee and orange juice side by side as the light spilled across their land. And for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She just felt home. The war that had followed her across oceans and deserts, through dreams and doubt, had finally been buried under soil and steel and sweat. And what rose in its place was peace.